1956. The giant film set in Texas. 3 seconds. That is all it took for Elizabeth Taylor to destroy every doubt Hollywood had ever had about her. She was 24 years old, and she was fighting. She had started as a child star, but now nobody took her seriously. Studio executives saw her as just a beautiful accessory. Directors questioned her talent. And that day on the giant set, George Stevens decided to end all those questions with a single test. He stopped the camera without warning, turned to Taylor in front of the entire crew, and issued a challenge that everyone expected her to fail. He told her to cry. Right now. No preparation, no motivation, just cry. The set fell silent. Everyone knew this was a trap. Everyone expected Taylor to stumble, to make excuses, to prove that she was nothing more than a pretty face. Yes, but Elizabeth Taylor looked at the camera, did not blink, and within 3 seconds, tears began streaming down her cheeks. The set was buried in silence. And George Stevens, for the first time in his career, felt he owed an actress an apology. What he said next would change Elizabeth Taylor's life forever. If you love stories about the legends of classic Hollywood and the moments that define their careers, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now. We bring you the untold stories of the golden age of cinema. Hit that subscribe button and join our family. But before we get to what George Stevens said in that moment, we need to go back. We need to understand who Elizabeth Taylor was before that day, what she had been through, and why proving herself on that Texas set meant everything to her. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. Elizabeth Taylor was born on February 27, 1932 in London, England. Her parents were Americans living abroad, her father an art dealer, and her mother a former actress who had given up her career for marriage. From her earliest years, Elizabeth displayed an extraordinary beauty that seemed almost unreal. Her violet eyes, framed by double rows of eyelashes, captivated everyone who met her. When the family moved to Los Angeles in 1939 to escape the approaching war in Europe, young Elizabeth's fate was sealed. Hollywood discovered her almost immediately. By the age of 9, she was signed to a studio contract. By 12, she had become a star with National Velvet, a film that made her one of the most famous children in the world. But the price of that early fame was something Elizabeth would carry for the rest of her life. She never had a normal childhood. While other girls her age were playing with friends and going to school dances, Elizabeth was working 12-hour days on film sets, surrounded by adults who saw her primarily as a valuable property to be protected and exploited. The transition from child star to adult actress is one of the most difficult journeys in Hollywood, and many young performers never successfully make it. The studios that had nurtured Elizabeth as a child now faced a dilemma. She was growing into a stunningly beautiful young woman, but could she act? Or was she simply a pretty face who had been lucky enough to be adorable as a child? These questions haunted Elizabeth throughout her teenage years and into her early 20s. She appeared in film after film, always cast primarily for her beauty rather than her talent. The roles she was given rarely challenged her abilities. She played sweet young women, romantic interests, decorative figures in larger stories about men. And with each passing year, the whispers in Hollywood grew louder. Elizabeth Taylor was gorgeous. Much everyone agreed on that. But was she really an actress? Or was she just a beautiful woman who happened to be in movies? Have you ever had people doubt your abilities based on how you looked? Elizabeth Taylor faced that challenge every single day of her early career. Let us know in the comments how you would handle that kind of constant underestimation. By the mid-1950s, Elizabeth Taylor was desperate to be taken seriously as an actress. She had watched other performers her age receive critical acclaim for challenging roles while she was still being cast as the pretty girl in lightweight romantic comedies. She knew she had more to offer, but Hollywood refused to see past her famous face. The frustration built inside her year after year. She studied her craft privately. And watching the great actresses of the era and learning from their techniques, she begged studio executives for more substantial roles, only to be told that audiences wanted to see her looking beautiful, not acting dramatically. The constant dismissal of her talent created a fire inside Elizabeth Taylor, a burning determination to prove everyone wrong. She just needed the right opportunity to show what she could really do. George Stevens was not like other Hollywood directors. While many filmmakers of that era were content to shoot quickly and efficiently, Stevens was a perfectionist who demanded absolute excellence from everyone on his sets. He had already directed some of the most acclaimed films of the 1940s and 50s, including A Place in the Sun and Shane. He was known for shooting dozens of takes of every scene, yet searching for moments of genuine truth that other directors might miss. He was also known for being incredibly demanding with his actors, pushing them to their emotional limits in pursuit of authentic performances. When Stevens began preparing to direct Giant, an epic adaptation of Edna Ferber's novel about a Texas ranching family, he knew he needed a leading lady who could carry the film through 30 years of story time. The role of Leslie Benedict would require an actress who could convincingly age from a young bride to a grandmother, someone who could hold her own against the powerful male performances he expected from Rock Hudson and James Dean. Many people in Hollywood suggested Elizabeth Taylor for the role. Stevens was skeptical. George Stevens had seen Elizabeth Taylor's films, and while he acknowledged her beauty, he was not convinced she had the depth required for Leslie Benedict. The role demanded more than just looking pretty on camera. It required an actress who could convey complex emotions, who could make audiences feel the passage of decades, who could stand as the moral center of an epic story. Stevens met with Taylor several times before casting her, and each meeting left him more uncertain. She was charming, certainly. She was undeniably gorgeous, but could she really act? Stevens decided to take a chance on her, partly because the studio pressured him and partly because he saw something in her eyes during their conversations, a hunger that intrigued him. But he remained watchful, ready to catch any sign that his doubts were justified. If you are enjoying this journey through Elizabeth Taylor's career, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing these incredible stories to life. Filming for Giant began in the summer of 1955 in Marfa, Texas, a small town that would stand in for the fictional Benedict Ranch. The conditions were brutal. Temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees. Dust storms swept across the flat landscape without warning. The cast and crew were far from the comforts of Hollywood, living in basic accommodations and working long hours under the punishing Texas sun. Elizabeth Taylor arrived on set determined to prove herself, but she quickly realized that George Stevens was watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Every scene she filmed, she could feel his eyes evaluating her, searching for weaknesses. Other members of the cast noticed it too. Rock Hudson, who played her husband in the film, later recalled that Stevens seemed to be waiting for Taylor to fail, almost hoping she would confirm his suspicions that she was not up to the role. As the weeks of filming continued, Elizabeth Taylor felt the pressure building inside her. She knew that Stevens doubted her. She knew that many people in Hollywood were waiting for her to stumble, to prove that she was nothing more than a pretty face who had been miscast in a serious, dramatic role. Every morning, she woke up with a knot in her stomach. Every night, she went to bed replaying her scenes in her mind, wondering if she had done enough, wondering if Stevens would finally see what she was capable of delivering. The stress was enormous, but Taylor refused to let it break her. She channeled all her anxiety into her performance, and using her real emotions to fuel the character of Leslie Benedict. What she did not know was that Stevens had been watching her more closely than she realized, and he was beginning to have second thoughts about his initial doubts. One of the unexpected developments during the Giant shoot was the friendship that formed between Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. Dean was already a rising star, fresh off his acclaimed performance in East of Eden, and he brought an intensity to the set that both excited and unnerved his colleagues. He and Taylor connected almost immediately, recognizing in each other a shared sense of being misunderstood by the Hollywood establishment. Dean was fighting against being typecast as a rebellious teenager. Taylor was fighting against being dismissed as just another pretty face. They spent hours talking between scenes, sharing their frustrations and their dreams. Dean encouraged Taylor to trust her instincts, to stop worrying about what directors and critics thought, and to simply inhabit her characters fully. It was advice that would serve her well in the challenging days ahead. The moment that would define Elizabeth Taylor's career came on an ordinary day during the Giant shoot. The cast and crew were preparing for a relatively simple scene, nothing particularly dramatic or emotionally demanding. George Stevens was in his usual position behind the camera, watching everything with his sharp, evaluating eyes. Taylor was on set, waiting for her cue, when Stevens suddenly called for everything to stop. The crew fell silent, uncertain what was happening. Stevens walked toward Taylor, and everyone on set could see from his expression that something was about to happen. He stood in front of her, looked directly into her famous violet eyes, and issued a challenge that no one expected. George Stevens told Elizabeth Taylor to cry. Right there, right then, in front of the entire crew. No preparation, no motivation, no scene to act, just produce tears on command. It was an impossible request, the kind of thing that even veteran actors struggle with when given time to prepare. Stevens was not giving her any time at all. The crew exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some of them thought Stevens was being cruel, deliberately trying to humiliate a young actress who was already struggling with self-doubt. Others thought he was simply testing her and seeing if she had the technical skill that separates great actors from merely good ones. Taylor herself stood frozen for a moment, processing what had just happened. Every doubt she had ever faced, every whisper about her being nothing more than a pretty face, every dismissal of her talent suddenly crystallized in this single moment. This was her chance to prove them all wrong. Have you ever faced a moment where everything you had worked for came down to a single test? That was Elizabeth Taylor's reality on that dusty Texas set. Share your own make-or-break moments in the comments. Elizabeth Taylor looked at George Stevens. She looked at the camera. She did not blink. She did not ask for time to prepare. She did not make excuses or explain that this was not fair. She simply let everything she was feeling rise to the surface. All the years of doubt, all the dismissals, all the hunger to be recognized for more than her beauty. And within 3 seconds, tears began streaming down her cheeks. They were not fake tears produced by some technical trick. They were real, genuine tears that came from somewhere deep inside her. The entire set fell absolutely silent. Crew members who had worked in Hollywood for decades later said they had never seen anything like it. The ability to summon genuine emotion on command without any preparation was a gift that very few actors possessed. Elizabeth Taylor had just proven she was one of them. George Stevens stood motionless for a long moment, staring at Elizabeth Taylor with an expression that had completely transformed from skepticism to something approaching awe. Then he lowered his head slightly, a gesture that those who knew him recognized as his way of acknowledging when he had been wrong. He looked up at Taylor again and spoke loud enough for everyone on set to hear. He said that this young woman was not just beautiful. She was a genius. He said that he had doubted her and he had been wrong. He said that what she had just done was something he had never seen in all his years of making films. The crew remained silent, understanding that they were witnessing something significant. Elizabeth Taylor stood there, tears still wet on her cheeks, finally receiving the recognition she had been fighting for her entire adult life. Word of what happened on the giant set spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Directors who had previously dismissed Elizabeth Taylor as just a pretty face began reconsidering their opinions. Studio executives who had been content to cast her in lightweight roles started thinking about more challenging projects for her. The industry's perception of Elizabeth Taylor shifted dramatically in the months following that day in Texas. She was no longer the beautiful girl who could not really act. She was now recognized as a serious, dramatic talent who happened to also be stunningly beautiful. The combination was irresistible to filmmakers looking for their next leading lady. If this incredible story of proving doubters wrong has moved you, please make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to believe in their own abilities. When Giant premiered in October of 1956, critics immediately recognized Elizabeth Taylor's performance as something special. She held her own against Rock Hudson and James Dean, and many reviewers singled her out as the emotional heart of the film. The movie was a massive commercial success and received 10 Academy Award nominations. Tragically, James Dean did not live to see the film's release. He had died in a car accident just weeks after completing his scenes, making Giant his final film. Taylor was devastated by the loss of her friend, but she channeled her grief into her subsequent performances, remembering Dean's advice to trust her instincts and inhabit her characters fully. The years following Giant saw Elizabeth Taylor's career reach extraordinary heights. In 1958, she received her first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress for Raintree County. The following year brought another nomination for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Then came Suddenly last summer, which earned her yet another nomination. Hollywood could no longer deny what George Stevens had discovered on that dusty Texas set. Elizabeth Taylor was one of the finest actresses of her generation. In 1960, she finally won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in Butterfield 8. 6 years later, she won again for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, a performance so raw and powerful that it silenced any remaining doubters forever. George Stevens never forgot what happened on the giant set. In interviews years later, he spoke about Elizabeth Taylor with profound respect, acknowledging that he had been wrong to doubt her, and that she had taught him an important lesson about judging people based on appearances. He called her one of the most naturally gifted actresses he had ever worked with, someone who could access emotions that most performers could only dream of reaching. Their professional relationship, which had begun with such tension, evolved into mutual admiration and respect. Stevens went on to direct many more acclaimed films, but he always remembered the young woman who had proven him wrong with nothing more than 3 seconds and a flood of genuine tears. That single moment on the giant set became part of Hollywood legend. It was told and retold in industry circles, becoming an example of how talent can triumph over doubt when given the chance to shine. For Elizabeth Taylor, it represented a turning point. The moment when she stopped being defined by her beauty alone and started being recognized for the extraordinary actress she truly was. She would go on to face many more challenges in her life and career, but she would never again have to prove that she could act. George Stevens had made sure of that, even if he had done so unintentionally. His test, meant perhaps to expose her limitations, had instead revealed her greatest strength. Some moments in history are about more than just the people involved. They are about the universal human experience of being underestimated and finding the strength to prove doubters wrong. Elizabeth Taylor stood on that Texas set in 1956, facing a challenge that could have destroyed her confidence forever. Instead, she turned it into her greatest triumph. 3 seconds. That is all it took. 3 seconds of genuine tears that washed away years of doubt and opened the door to one of the most celebrated acting careers in cinema history. George Stevens asked Elizabeth Taylor to cry as a test. What he got was a masterclass in the power of authentic talent, and Hollywood was never quite the same again.